Hi all and welcome back to my channel. My name is Davis and on this channel we cover all things tech, and today we are going to be reviewing something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and that is review a brand new Samsung device. Yep, today we are fantastically not going to talk about something ancient and irrelevant that I've bought from eBay for a nominal sum. A bit like how I did with this K-Zoom over here, with this S4, and God forbid this Galaxy Beam. Because I've actually gone out and bought one of these, a brand new Galaxy S24 Ultra for over 2,200 Australian dollars, just to make this video. Aren't I just brilliant with my money? But was it worth it? And that's what we're here to find out. So if you enjoy watching tech videos like this one, I would really appreciate a like and also subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and also let me know any questions that you might have in the comments below. And this video is sponsored by Ultrahuman. So I've been wearing the Ring Air Smart Ring even beyond my initial review period, and that's because with every single update it is just getting better and better. For example, during my initial review I mentioned how I couldn't take it off because data from my Apple Watch just would not sync with the Ultrahuman app. However, now they've just fixed that, which means that when I go to the gym, I can use my Apple Watch and leave this ring at home to charge. And when I go to a fancy event and don't want to wear an ugly smartwatch, I can just wear the ring instead. It really is the perfect solution to keeping track of your health at all times with no compromise. And with my code, you can get 10% off the $349 asking price, link in the description. And also, unlike a certain competitor, there is no subscription fee required to unlock all of the advanced health tracking features. So let's just quickly cover the context of why I'm reviewing this phone today. So the thing is, I've never really liked Samsung all that much. I've always thought that they just took other people's ideas and made just a cheaper version of that phone with some ridiculous features and pretty awful software that sounded flashy but was rather difficult to use. I mean, do we remember the Blackjack? That wasn't at all like a BlackBerry, was it? We obviously had the original Galaxy S that had quite a bit of resemblance to the early iPhones. We had the S3 that was inspired by nature, and also the Palm Pre in many ways. The list goes on and on. For a long time, they really didn't seem to have any original ideas. However, sometimes I would just reveal something that's completely ridiculous and out of this world that would be offered for a year or two and then fade back into obscurity. I mean, who else would have created the Galaxy Beam? This was a yellow mid-range phone with a projector on it. It's absolutely insane, but nobody bought it and it lasted just 2 generations. And there was the K-Zoom as well, which was a follow-up to the S4 Zoom. I mean, how insane an idea was this? It admittedly married a pretty terrible digital camera with a Galaxy S phone. And the Galaxy Note was sort of created from the same idea, but this one was a little bit different because the idea actually stuck and really transformed the mobile world for better or for worse. For example, this was the phone that I was using in 2011, and let's just compare the sizes of phones after the Galaxy Note came out. Even with the HP there extended, it is far smaller than what's sort of an average size phone today. So they made a massive phone with a stylus. I like styluses, so I've always enjoyed the idea of a Galaxy Note. But then that became the Ultra, and now we've got a phone that basically has absolutely insane specs that we expect from a Samsung, including the camera and also fun little silly things like the stylus. It seems like a recipe for something fantastic, right? And overall, I would say yes, the Galaxy S24 Ultra is fundamentally probably the best phone hardware I've ever used, but it's not short of issues at the same time, especially on the software front. So let's talk about the hardware first. So the hardware, I would say, is absolutely beautiful. This is arguably one of the most beautiful phones ever made. It's sort of a little bit like a massive Nokia N9 if they continued making those. I love how refreshingly blocky this phone is. In a world where every phone seems to have rounded corners, having an actually rectangular display looks fantastic. I adore the minimal symmetrical bezels, the rounded sides. Even the camera module looks fantastic, even if the lenses themselves stick out a lot. As you can see, I got the titanium grey colour, and while it is reminiscent of Apple's titanium grey, it's actually a little bit bit nicer to my eyes. It's a little bit warmer, and the titanium looks and feels great too. Although I do understand it's grade 2 titanium, not grade 5, and for some reason that's worse, but on a phone, it really doesn't matter. We're not going to space with any of these. I believe that titanium is a great change from the older chromed aluminium that I felt was always a little bit too soft a material for something this big and heavy, as that would both scratch and dent relatively easily. There are some things that I don't love though, and that includes the completely flat display. I believe that this is the first time for a Galaxy Ultra to have such a screen, and why Samsung have they thrown away their legacy and followed the crowd in replacing their curved screens for a boring flat one. The old curved screen felt incredible to swipe on, and now we're left with something that's less interesting, and the software features that really benefited from the curve, a little bit like this slide out menu over here, it just feels really odd to have now, as it's always sitting on the side of the display. But at least it is a very pretty screen. In fact, it's quite possibly the prettiest of all the screens that I've seen. It's a QHD plus resolution AMOLED display that can reach a brightness of 2600 nits. And while that sounds very impressive, and it is, that's not the most impressive part of it. The most impressive part of this particular display is the new anti-reflective coating. That is truly groundbreaking. It's so good that I don't think that I can adequately describe it to you or show you on camera. You really need to see it in real life to just see quite how good this is. I can sort of show you the difference when I compare it to my iPhone that does have a screen protector on it. You can see that it's far less reflective than the iPhone's display. And what it basically is that it's got a brand new Corning Gorilla Glass that's not only harder than before, bringing it to a similar level to Apple's ceramic shield glass, but the coating is a lot less reflective than other anti-reflective coatings that we've seen. And I compared it to an iPhone without a screen protector and also the Nokia N9 in a short form video, but the difference really is quite stark. With the lack of reflections, colors look a lot more vibrant and less washed out, and the blacks just look incredible even in well-lit conditions. It's sort of like seeing the difference between seeing a laminated display to a display with an air gap. It really is quite incredible. Unfortunately though, that is literally all ruined if you just put a normal screen protector on it. Unless if you use the Samsung specific anti-reflective one that apparently is awful from reviews, but I haven't personally tried it out. Now under the display there's also a fingerprint reader that works pretty great. I really do love these every time I see one, and the selfie camera is also nestled inside a very small punch hole. And while that means that there's no secure Face ID, which means that anybody with a picture of me could probably just log into this very phone, but the fingerprint reader is still pretty great to have. One small thing is that there is no Bixby button. Now I don't know when they exactly got rid of that, but I absolutely love the action button on my iPhone 15 Pro Max. I use it for the orientation lock, and it really feels rather weird not to have it. Of course, you can just assign a double press of the power button to certain tasks, but it really isn't the same, nor is it nearly as adjustable. You've really only got a few options, plus the ability to open any app that you like settings in this case, but let's just set it to quick launch camera. So while this is good, it's just not as useful to me at least as the action button is. On the bottom of the phone, I'm also very glad to say that there is the S Pen stylus, which feels very satisfying to remove. The movement feels really fantastic, like it's such a satisfying spring-loaded movement. However, even for my small hands, the pen is a little bit too small for me, but it is pretty cool to have. And we'll talk more about this stylus later. On the bottom as well, we do have a USB-C port and also one of the stereo speakers. Now the stereo speakers, while are pretty loud and clear on this phone, they don't sound nearly as full as the iPhones. It doesn't have quite the same lower frequency reproduction. If you really do care about the speakers on your phone, and you probably don't, the iPhone is slightly better on that front. And also I would like to add just how much this phone rocks when it is placed on a table. I mean, just look at that. I absolutely hate it. Now that's the main advantage of the Pixel in my eyes. It's a phone that doesn't rock. I mean, why don't we have a camera in each corner? Problem solved. And while I do love the hardware overall, let's also note that it's not the most comfortable thing to hold either. There's a reason why most phones these days have curved screen corners, so they're a little bit more comfortable than this thing that just digs into your palm. Okay, so now let's talk about what this phone is like to use. So this phone uses the One UI running on Android 14, and I've used plenty of Android phones in the past, from Oppos to Motorola's and Tank phones, and generally I really do like the OS, but I feel like that Samsung software makes Android a little bit worse and not better. And this does seem to be somewhat at odds with the narrative that I've been hearing about One UI on other reviews, which seems to have drawn much praise for its simplicity and cohesive interface. But in a nutshell, while I did fall in love with the features, it does feel a little bit disjointed and needlessly complex. So firstly, let's start with the lock screen. I think personally that's pretty great. Some people say that they've taken a lot from iOS, but yeah, so what? Both OSs have taken from each other a lot. I personally love having the wallpaper visible when the phone is locked, and also the customizable lock screens are a pretty good idea as well. I'm just surprised that it took Android so long to implement them. And now we come to the home screen. I've tried to keep everything as default as possible to get the full Samsung experience here. And yes, I do preface by saying that of course you can adjust the phone to your liking, but to see Samsung's intentions with the phone, I've spent most of my time by changing as little of the interface as I could. And the main thing I noticed is that I absolutely hate the default navigation bar. I have no idea how 3 items on the bottom is still treated as the default option here. On a phone this big, my thumb can rarely stretch to the other side. I mean, just look at that. Reaching the multitasking button is a little bit of a chore, and vice versa, the back button when I'm holding it with my other hand. I think as the Palm Pre showed 15 years ago, gestures are just the best option, so that really should be default. And when you don't have gestures as well, it just makes the phone overall more difficult to work with. For example, if I wanted to go back on this particular web page, usually I could just swipe from either side. However, with this default Samsung interface, I have to sort of stretch to the back button to actually go back. But of course, this is all solved by changing a single option, so that is okay. Secondly, let's take a look at how the interface looks. And yes, I do know that you can change it with apps like Good Lock, which allow you to basically change almost every single thing that you can with the phone. But I'm here to judge the default experience, which is what probably 99% of users will try. And overall, I personally just don't love how it looks. I'm not saying that it's awful, because it's far from it, but certain elements just feel a little bit dated and a little bit confused. Let's just start with the icon design. The color palette, the shape of the icons, and even their design look suspiciously similar to Nokia Symbian Bell from over 10 years ago. There's other things as well, like the notifications being a really bubbly design. And then all of a sudden on the bottom, we've got a very blocky bar that's just conflicting with the rest of the interface. I mean, what is that all about? Another thing as well, Android widgets just look terrible in general. Like, look at how hideous this YouTube widget is. As I've said before, I also hate how there's this slide out panel over here that's visible at all times. Surely there should have been a better way to implement this sort of multitasking. And it gets even busier than this if we were to remove the S Pen. And yet we've got another floating feature over here, which takes us to various menu items. All these things might feel like nitpicks, but when standard Android 14 is so good, I think that we've got a right to question Samsung's custom UI decisions if it arguably makes the experience worse. And while we are getting all of the bad points out of the way, I also despise the way that there are so many duplicate apps. Why, when we've got the Play Store, for instance, do we need the Samsung App Store? Why do we have Google Photos and at the same time also have a Samsung Gallery? And also, why do we have Google Chrome when we've got the Samsung browser. And while I understand why this is the case, I really wish that Samsung was allowed to delete all of the Google apps, apart from the Play Store obviously, and have a purer Samsung experience. However, there are some things I like as well. The control center, it's a lot more condensed than on standard Android, so there's a lot less scrolling, which is really good to have. Next up, I really want to talk about the S Pen though, and how much I adore it. Not only does it remind me of my Palm Trio phone, but I love how I can just take it out when the phone is locked and just immediately start taking notes. I also love how I can write instead of type my words. And I also adore how I can use the stylus as a magic wand and use it to navigate my phone, like I'm in Harry Potter. The S Pen really is fantastic, and it's shocking how no other phone has adopted this really good feature. Something else that's also really great is multitasking. And to be fair, this is more of an Android thing than a Samsung thing. The ability to use split screen, as in run Twitter on the bottom and TikTok on the top, I wouldn't say has been overly useful, but it's a feature that I really do like having, that I'm sad iOS still hasn't implemented. The thing is though, I don't feel like that I do enough actual work on my phone to really take advantage of this fully. And also, when we do begin to type, obviously the keyboard takes up half of the display, which means that it's pretty useless for actually doing typing work. But if you just want to watch videos and scroll social media at the same time, absolutely nothing beats this. Something that's even more questionable, but I find even cooler than that, is the windowed mode. I think we have to say that it's a pretty ridiculous feature to have on a screen so small. For example, is having 3 apps open like this actually useful to anyone? But I really do admire the ambition of it all, and of course this does play into the Samsung Dex feature. Speaking of features that probably few will use are some of the new AI features, and while they're very cool, they're kind of hit or miss for me. Firstly, there's the image editing. As someone who loves a little bit of Adobe generative AI in Photoshop, I knew sort of what to expect. Like with the new Pixel phones and the new Galaxy, you can use AI to move an object in an image around, or you can remove it entirely, and you can make edits like that. And the thing is, you do sort of have to know its limits, because obviously you can't do anything too ambitious, as it would look awful. But it's pretty good for removing certain things in the background that you don't want if it's a simple fix. I would say that it's a little bit better at removing reflections in an image, but it's not perfect for that either. But what it is really good at is adding to the size of images if you do want to expand them a little bit during the straightening process, for instance, and that can work remarkably well, even with human faces, as we can see on this particular example. AI search is probably the AI feature that works best though. Basically, if you hold down on the middle button, or if you've got gesture navigation on, you hold down on the gesture button, you can circle anything that you would like on the screen, and it will automatically search Google for that particular device. For example, we can now see that this is a Porsche 911. Possibly a 1983 Carrera 3.2. While this is quite a cool feature and works pretty well, I haven't really found much of a use for it outside of demos like this, but I'm sure that its time will come. And finally, there are the translation and generative text features. Now, I do have to admit that the translations were rudimentary at best, but they work when you're desperate. And I also hate the idea of AI rephrasing my words to make it sound more casual or more professional or whatever, but I was honestly pretty shocked at how good it was. For example, I've just selected one of my scripts over here, and it will provide me several different versions of for a professional version, casual version, something that I would want to post to socials, and so on. Because it was so good, I guess I could have technically gotten it to rephrase someone else's review of this phone and save me a lot of time, but I didn't, so that's your loss, I guess. And while these features are free for now, rumor has it that they may become paid subscriptions in a couple of years, and if that does happen, well, let's just say that I probably would not pay for them. And now let's talk about battery and performance. So the performance of this phone with the Snapdragon Series 8 Gen 3 has quite simply been absolutely stupendous. Outside of lagging a little bit when I was trying to emulate Gran Turismo 4, it has been an absolute riot. It's never lagged, there's been barely a stutter, and I've been super impressed by the performance. It's also managed to stay a lot cooler than my iPhone 15 Pro Max during typical usage as well. It hasn't ever become worryingly warm like how the iPhone sometimes does. In Geekbench, it got 2228 for single core and 6688 for multi-core, which are both very, very impressive scores. The iPhone, for instance, got slightly better single core and also slightly better multi-core, but they are very, very close indeed. And I do believe that the Samsung has better graphics too. Battery life, on the other hand, I do have to say, while it has been good, it's no better than my iPhone 15 Pro Max though. That means with my very heavy usage, I typically run out of battery right before the end of my day, sometimes during my evening. And to be fair, that's roughly the best that you can get on a smartphone outside of something like a tank phone, but it could always be better. One thing that I am slightly annoyed though is that although it does have pretty quick USB-C charging, it does not have Qi 2 charging. I really do wish that there was a magnet inside this wireless charging coil. I mean, come on Samsung, we've had this feature for a long time on other phones, why are we still waiting for it here? And so now finally we come to the cameras, and there's actually 4 of them over here on the back, and there's 5 if we include the selfie camera. So what cameras do we have on the back at least then? Firstly, we do have the wide camera that is a 13mm in focal length with a pretty reasonable 1 in 2.5 inch sensor and a f2.2 aperture. It's pretty good, not brilliant though, and it's definitely equivalent to the iPhone 15 Pro's wide camera. And next up, we do have the main sensor, and it's pretty ridiculous in specification because it's got a 200 megapixel 1 in 3.3 inch sensor with a 23mm and f1.7 lens. And while the sensor is slightly smaller than the iPhone's, it does have a slightly brighter lens. However, the 200 megapixels on the sensor did worry me a little bit, as the sensor is pretty small, and the images that this sensor takes actually has roughly the same amount of detail as the iPhone, despite this phone having only 48 megapixels. And when I compared it to the 12-year-old Nokia 808 PureView with the larger 41 megapixel sensor, the detail that the Samsung was able to resolve in optimum lighting situations was just not noticeably better against the iPhone or the Nokia. Next up, we have the smallest of these cameras, which is an absolutely mediocre 3x or 69mm sensor that's only 1 in 3.3 inches in size, and it's not really worth using or talking about. I think it's the perfect focal length, I imagine, for portraits, so I really wish that this sensor was a little bit better. And finally, this is quite a controversial part of this device because they swapped out one of the defining features of the past couple of Samsung Ultra generations. They swapped out the 10x zoom camera for a 5x, and did that have an effect? Maybe. Does it matter though? Probably not, because the 5x, which is equivalent to roughly 115mm, has a larger sensor than the iPhone's telephoto lens at 1 in 2.5 inches, but the lens is slightly slower at f3.4, but at least it is 50 megapixels now. However, despite that, I just could not see an appreciative increase in detail because of the resolution when compared to the iPhone. And if we were to put the images side by side, the 5x zoom lens on the Samsung versus the iPhone, it's a little bit difficult to judge because at first glance the images of the Samsung does look a lot cleaner and less grainy than the iPhones. However, much of that seems to be from noise reduction algorithms, which are a little bit questionable at best. So I would say that these sensors are also roughly equivalent as well. Overall, while I did enjoy using the cameras on the Samsung S24 Ultra, I found that the images just looked a little bit too processed for my likings. I mean, don't get me wrong, the iPhone does this as well, but the Samsung just takes it to the next level. Look at this image here, which was taken on the Nokia 808 PureView. While the highlights are a little bit blown, it's done in quite a pleasing way, and the skin tones and everything look nice and natural and balanced. Now look at the Samsung, it is an HDR mess. The colors have been oversaturated. I look like I've got a Donald Trump tan, for instance. The highlights in the background look the same brightness as everything else. It's just an HDR mess. And when you download the RAW capture app, things just look the same. The RAW processing seems to be identical to the JPEG, so that doesn't really help unless if you want to do a lot of work in post, which you probably wouldn't want to do with a phone camera. At least the video was pretty impressive. The stabilization especially was excellent, but the color reproduction is just too bright, too flat, that, and the constant over sharpening just makes the iPhone look a lot closer to a professional camera, especially when it has ProRes and also Apple log as well. So while I feel that the Samsung's camera hardware is indeed excellent, and it really is, the software tuning really lets it down here, and that's basically my issue with this entire phone. Brilliant hardware, but slightly questionable software. I feel that Samsung really hasn't changed in the past 10 years. They've always been the manufacturer with incredible hardware, well, maybe from the S6 onwards, but let's just say ambitious hardware, but I've really been let down by relatively mediocre software. And while the software isn't bad anymore, and while you can adjust it to your likings if you don't really like it, for example, I really love my Windows Phone launcher, I would say that this phone just lacks the level of polish that would really take it to the next level. Despite all that, thanks to the incredible hardware, the S Pen, which I adore and you can't get anywhere else, and also the 7 years of software support, which is insane, this is the Android phone that I would recommend for most people, and I would say that it's roughly on par with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And while I do prefer the iPhone, if you decide to get the Samsung, I 100% respect your choice. Now, if you've got any questions, as usual, feel free to comment below, and also let me know your thoughts about this phone there as well. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe, and on that note, toodaloo.